Alrighty, folks, here it is. The biggest news of the CDL and the biggest news of the offseason, the biggest news coming into next season of Call of Duty Black Ops Cold War. HECZ has reacquired Optic Gaming in a deal separate from his association with Energy. Now, this report does come from the Esports Observer. They released this article just moments ago, pretty much giving a few details on that HECZ has now reacquired Optic Gaming. Now, this article does go on to say that negotiations between HECZ and Optic have pretty much been going over the span of the last month and are officially coming to an end. And again, according to this report, which it's not official, but according to this report, he has in fact reacquired Optic Gaming in a deal that is separate from Energy. We know he is a co-owner of Energy, obviously is, one of the main ties behind the Chicago Huntsman brand. Really all of this drama pretty much began at the start of last season, kind of in the off season, just over a year ago. We know that HECZ pretty much had originally placed bids on the ownership of Optic Gaming. Essentially, it was being sold by Infinite, who became the parent company to Optic. They obviously didn't run it well. They had to sell it, and they did not sell it to HECZ. They instead decided to sell it to the Immortals Gaming Club, who apparently up until this point were obviously in ownership of the Optic Gaming brand, the IP, the LA spot, etc., etc. So this kind of started back last season, last off season, when HECZ, it was kind of known progressively throughout the time that he was going to be in bidding for it, does not obviously get that bid, does not win, if you will, the deal in this instance. But according to this report, it looks as if he could be, in fact, reacquiring the entire Optic Gaming IP along with the CDL Los Angeles spot. So not only does he get the name Optic Gaming back, not only can he pretty much own that IP again, he also gets the opportunity to be in ownership of the CDL Los Angeles spot. So in this situation, right, as he has, according to this report, purchased it from the Immortals Gaming Club, and Esports Observer is a very, very well-known esports website. I highly suggest that you do check them out. They are one of the many esports websites that I honestly do read very often, so I am pretty sure in this report, I have a lot of confidence that this is in fact going to come to pass. So in this situation, HECZ has two options, because due to the fact that he is in some way a ownership of the Chicago Huntsman and NRG brand, he cannot have ownership over two. When we talk about how the season kind of progresses, it's very detailed, but just to kind of put it lightly, he essentially has two options, right? He either goes back, owns the CDL Los Angeles spot, keeps them as the name of Optic, and kind of moves forward, or he could potentially, and again, a lot of details that we're not 100% for sure on, he also has the ability to kind of keep the Chicago Huntsman brand going. Because he has to be involved with one of them. And it's really a matter of which one do you choose, right? Do you stay with Energy, or do you move over to LA? Now, again, I don't believe that he is done with Energy, and I don't think that he is going to retake over the LA position, because we know Chicago's close to home, right? We know the history that is there in this particular location. I think that he's had a great time over Energy. He and Andy Miller seem to get along super well. I watched the Energy Duo podcast. Just in general, they seem to be very, very good partners, and I think HECZ has really enjoyed his time with Energy. Again, that is totally my perspective on things. I don't know anything about it in terms of the internal things, but just based on what it looks like, I'm not under the impression that HECZ kind of wants to start something totally off on his own in this moment. Now, this is personally what I believe happens. This is totally what I think could happen. I'm going to provide you with some updates in terms of how this could work. What I believe happens is that the Huntsman brand is over. I do. I think that and this has to be approved by the CDL. That was also something that the Esports Observer article went on to say. It has not been approved by the CDL as of yet, or at least by the time of that report coming out. So what I believe happens is that the Huntsman brand is gone, right? I think HECZ, now that he owns the Optic Gaming IP, is now going to change the Huntsman's name to the Chicago Optic. Now, is that even possible? Don't know, right? Really don't know. I maybe even people who are involved with this deal on the internals don't even know that yet either. But I believe that is what's going to take place. I think the name of LA Optic is no longer going to exist. I think the Optic name gets transitioned possibly from the LA team over to Chicago. Chicago is now referred to as the Chicago Optic, as HECZ does own the IP for that. And I believe that the LA brand will essentially be sold to a new entity. So another organization. Immortals is pretty much out in this situation due to the fact that HECZ owns the spot. I think that HECZ is going to sell it. Now, is it called the LA Huntsman? I kind of doubt that, right? Because of their association with Chicago. You never know. Maybe we see the flip-flop, but I think from a branding standpoint, from the CDL's perspective, I don't think that takes place. I think that it's called the Chicago Optic. HECZ then pretty much owns the LA spot and has to sell that to another organization, another investment company who wants to come in. Now, there has been a lot of speculation pretty much right after this article was released about 100 Thieves, right? Nadeshot, his association, he's already in LA, an opportunity to have this spot, an opportunity to come through. Now, I know this isn't exactly kind of to T, but you also think about the players that are on this LA team, at least for right now, guys like Slasher and Kenny, who were on the 100 Thieves team after they decided to not enter into franchising for obviously the first year of the CDL. There have been talks, and there's been a little bit of chatter recently about Nadeshot possibly investing back into the CDL, or kind of coming back to Call of Duty with the 100 Thieves brand. There's even been rumors about Dr. Disrespect, a number of different other people discussing their interest in potentially joining with the CDL. I think he had like a name called the San Diego Speed. You just never really know, right? There could be some lines that are starting to be drawn. Maybe this conversation is existing for a particular reason. So that is what my impression is. I believe that we will have the Chicago Optic moving into next year. What happens with the Huntsman brand? Not 100% sure. There's also been people who have been kind of under the impression that Optic maybe does not get associated with Call of Duty anymore. Maybe it becomes kind of more of a home brand. It's solely based around content. I think that actually is a possibility, but I think the potential that the Optic Gaming name has now with HECZ again at the forefront is too valuable to really let you slide by, right? You own the IP for it. Obviously, maybe there's a deal that gets worked out with NRG in terms of like if HECZ ever were to leave NRG, he obviously owns the IP for Optic, so he always is in control of that name no matter what. So again, I don't know all the details, of course, that go along with this. This is purely speculation as of right now. And then we kind of get into this conversation of, is the CDL going to allow the Optic name to kind of progress, for it to change hands? When we talk about regular franchise leagues, it has happened before, right? There have been teams that have been in different locations, right? The Los Angeles Lakers weren't always in Los Angeles. Minneapolis Lakers was actually the name before it. Again, you have a lot of different situations, and I think that they are going to be flexible about this. They've been kind of flexible with brands in the past. We've seen Optic, we've seen FaZe transition into franchising after it was rumored that they couldn't. There's rumors about, well, would 100 Thieves rather, like to transition into COD because they couldn't have the 100 Thieves name. I'd imagine they can still have Thieves, because based on what has been the previous rhetoric from the other organizations, as long as it's not FaZe Clan or, I know Optic Gaming didn't have any other esports teams, but in this situation, you shorten the name into some capacity and you kind of roll through with it. So who knows, right? Could we have the Chicago Optic and the LA Thieves moving forward? Is it rather Nadeshot's opportunity to buy this spot from HECZ? Is HECZ actually still interested in maybe even going over to LA, holding on to the LA Optic spot? And in that situation, it gets very complicated, right? Because if you are in that position, how do contracts work when it comes down to the CDL? Whatever, are all of the Optic Gaming players going to transition over to Chicago? Are all the Chicago players going to transition over to the LA spot, right? What kind of happens with Scump? What happens with Formal and Dashy and Envoy? And what happens with the Slasher group? Like, what really happens in that situation? And that's the reason why I believe what's going to happen is what's going to happen. Again, details are still early. We're going to provide you with updates as time does go on. But wow, did not expect this announcement. It was not something that I expected to see anytime soon. At one point, I thought there was potential that maybe sometime down the line we could see HECZ be back under the Optic Gaming brand. But to see him back and owning the IP over pretty much a season, if you will, of Call of Duty, it is remarkable. It's great. I think it's going to be amazing for the scene. I truly do. To have things like the Green Wall back, right? What time does Optic play? Let's go Optic. The amount of historical significance that is in the Optic Gaming brand, and for HECZ to be back at the forefront of it, the guy who absolutely created it from the ground up, to be back in kind of the head honcho seat, I think is the best thing for the CDL moving forward. I think it's going to be great from a viewership standpoint, and it without question is going to be the biggest storyline moving into the CDL, as this brand, right, this name of Optic, is without question the most legendary brand in Call of Duty esports, and they've officially returned back with the man who created it all.